Welcome to Incredible Idaho. I'm Jack Hemingway. Tonight we begin our show by soaring among the craggy peaks and valleys of Idaho's high country, an impossible place that a curious creature called the mountain goat calls home. It doesn't sound that difficult. Cruise the mountains in a helicopter and simply count how many goats you see. Wildlife biologist Mike Scott and pilot Ron Geip are conducting mountain goat surveys. Every 4 to 6 years, the Idaho Department of Fish and Game flies the various mountain ranges of Idaho to evaluate the health and density of our mountain goat populations. A country like this poses its own unique challenges. These are the White Cloud Peaks, a spiny range that boasts all the classic craggy and jagged elements that are distinctive to the northern Rocky Mountains.
When you fly goat habitats, you fly an awful lot of country that doesn't have very many animals in it. It's not productive ground. A lot of sterile, rocky soil. It isn't producing very much. Goat densities don't get very high. It's rough, craggy, steep, cliffy, nasty place to make a living. We have some goat populations in the region that are doing very well, as these White Clouds goats are. They're up at around 300 goats, which is very good. Lots of goats in this particular area.
This may sound like quite a large number, but they're scattered over 300 square miles of backcountry. In the winter, goats tend to gather in small groups of 3 or 4 that stay in one place. It appears that they survive in these harsh conditions by remaining relatively stationary and conserving energy, rather than foraging extensively for food. That is, until a helicopter appears.
Goats don't like helicopters at all. They're going to move. And typically what they try and do is get under cover of some kind. The theory is that's because they grew up with basically just avian predators, eagles for instance, when they're small. They'll try and dive under rock ledges, into little crannies. They'll dive under trees. So it's kind of a challenge to get good goat pictures from a helicopter because they'll move from you.
Even in the summer, mountain goats remain in the relative safety of these craggy high cliffs. Goats have never been plentiful, but population numbers seem to remain steady. A female does not produce her first kid until the age of 3, and rarely has twins. If the young offspring manages to evade eagles and the occasional mountain lion in its first summer, it has a good chance of reaching adulthood. The factors that seem to affect mountain goat populations the most are weather patterns, accidents, snowslides or falls from a cliff, and of course changes in habitat. Helicopter surveys help biologists recommend a management plan for the species.
We're just trying to monitor the populations of goats, see whether they're going up and down, see whether or not a population is big enough to sustain a harvest. We know from past experience in Idaho and lots of other western states that you've got to be pretty conservative with goat permits. They can't take much harvest, and goat populations start to go downhill. So we have to actually be fairly conservative on our permits and monitor them.
Monitoring the mountain goat population in this rugged country involves some pretty tricky flying, an integral part of the job that is taken very seriously.
It challenges me to play the winds, the upslope winds and the downslope winds. You just have to be on top of it, and it is challenging.
Biologists from the Idaho Department of Fish and Game will fly over 2,000 hours in 1994 conducting wildlife counts, capturing animals for research studies, surveying salmon habitat and planting fish in Idaho's mountain lakes. Naturally, there's a certain amount of risk involved in all flying, but operating an airplane or helicopter at low altitude through Idaho's rugged backcountry adds another element of danger. 9 people, 2 of them department employees, have been killed in fixed-wing and helicopter accidents since 1970 while flying for Fish and Game. One survivor is Mike Scott. It was the spring of 1987. Mike, a conservation officer and a pilot, were flying in a Hiller helicopter along the Middle Fork of the Salmon River counting bighorn sheep. They were on their way back to base camp when the tail rotor failed.
And we did go into a spin. We just spun into the mountainside and rolled down the hill. Pretty nasty accident. Kind of a combination of equipment failure and pilot error put us on the ground. That was about 6 o'clock in the evening, and the officer and I we had some minor injuries, but the pilot was pretty seriously injured. And we couldn't get out to anyone, couldn't talk to anyone, no one could find us until the next morning. And by that time, the pilot had died during the course of the night. So I guess for me personally, that's when I started taking the flying a lot more seriously, particularly the safety.
The department had just begun the process of revising its air safety policy when Mike's accident occurred. Things changed considerably after the crash, beginning with the procedure for acquiring air services. Now all pilots and helicopters are required to be approved by the U.S. Office of Aircraft Service, or OAS. These days, there's also a check-in procedure where the aircraft is contacted every hour from the ground.
Yeah, hell, it's going 30 knots here. Just gusting like hell.
As you may well imagine, it was pretty tough for Mike to climb into a helicopter again. For a while, he thought he might have to consider doing something else for a living.
I get, probably 100 hours of airtime a year. And by the time you do that over the course of 3 or 4 years, you can start to get comfortable with it again. But yeah, it bothered me. That was a tough time for 2 or 3 years. And you still think about it, especially when you're doing something like goat flying, because it's not particularly any more dangerous than any other kind of flying that we do. It just is, the terrain is so much scarier.
Scary to us, perhaps, but home to that incredibly sure-footed creature, the shaggy mountain goat.
We've got a little one.
Holy cow.
We lost one that we fought for 10 minutes
Jeff, is that your first
and
one?
had us going around and around the
The
boat.
one you guys just caught.
When many of us dream of catching a huge trophy fish in Idaho, we might think of hooking into a 6-foot sturgeon or maybe a 25-pound steelhead. But there's a new member of the Big Fish Club that's drawing anglers from all over the Northwest to fish Coeur d'Alene Lake. They're coming to catch huge northern pike, big slimy green monsters that weigh over 20 pounds.
You had any hits?
Not today, yesterday I got a couple.
All right. Now the word's out, and it's very typical to see this many people fishing on a weekday, and then on a weekend it's really crowded. So.
April is the best time to catch monster pike in Lake Coeur d'Alene because the fish are lying low in shallow water, just 2 to 4 feet deep, while they're spawning in the weeds. At this time of year, the most successful anglers use live bait, herring or smelt, to catch these voracious fish eaters.
Let's just get one.
Grab the big one. Grab the big one. Grab the big one.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah,
What does that weigh?
that's close to 20.
We have a scale,
Yeah, that's close to 20.
but it's got to be over 10.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, that's a.
So how many? You got another one in there too?
We've got 3 total. We've got a little one.
Holy cow.
We lost one that we fought for 10 minutes
Jeff, is that your first
and
one?
had us
Yeah.
going around and around the
The
boat.
one you guys.
And this is the one we just caught.
See how fat those fish are?
Due to an abundant food supply in Lake Coeur d'Alene, northern pike grow faster and thicker than anywhere else in the world.
Our pike are also are in fact the fastest growing of any ever recorded. The state record fish, several that were over 30 pounds, were only 7 years old. And that growth rate doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. So, and we don't expect that type of growth rate to continue. I think it's a sign of a relatively new population expanding into a new area, a new forage basin. Over time, that we expect those growth rates to decline.
Northern pike are not native to Coeur d'Alene Lake. In the early 1970s, somebody introduced pike into a few lateral lakes in the Coeur d'Alene Basin, which is an illegal act.
Rumor has it that 12 fish from Lone Pine Reservoir over the Bitterroots in Montana were brought over, stocked into Cave Lake, and that's where they got their start.
The first recorded catch of a northern pike in the Coeur d'Alene Basin was 20 years ago.
Since that time, they've spread throughout the lateral lakes in the tributary to the Coeur d'Alene River throughout all the bays in Coeur d'Alene Lake, and have sprouted legs and have found their way into Hauser, Hayden, Twin Lakes, many of our lowland lakes. So the fishermen have been transporting them around, and seems like just about anywhere they're released, they take.
The release of northern pike into the Coeur d'Alene Lake system created some cause for alarm. Knowing that pike are prolific fish eaters, Fish and game biologists were concerned about how pike would affect other fish in the lakes: perch, bass, crappie, kokanee, and native cutthroat trout.
Good.
Pike are effective predators because they have very large teeth. Quarter-inch teeth line their jaws, and smaller teeth are found on their tongue and on the roof of their mouth.
It's kind of a one-way ride once you get in that mouth. It's all down the throat.
They're more of an ambush fish. They'll lay in the weeds, something comes by, they nail it. And so if that, whatever fish comes by, obviously it'd hit it, but...
A research project in 1990 showed that pike were eating mainly perch, cutthroats, suckers, and kokanee. So as the populations of northern pike built rapidly in Coeur d'Alene Lake, Fish and Game allowed a fairly liberal year-long fishing season and a bag limit of 5 fish per day to keep pike from killing too many other fish, especially the native cutthroat trout.
You know, there's enough people fishing on them now where man is pretty much the balancer in that whole deal. So they're getting harvested to a point now where their population is going to stay in check.
Jeff Smith, owner of Fins and Feathers Tackle Shop in Coeur d'Alene, started to catch pike in the mid-1980s, when only the locals knew about the emerging pike fishery in Lake Coeur d'Alene.
I've fished on them back east and in Canada and around, and I could catch more big fish right here in Coeur d'Alene Lake than any place I ever went.
Once the word leaked out that people were catching 20-pound pike in Lake Coeur d'Alene, all kinds of anglers wanted in on the action.
We're getting a lot of new pike fishermen. You know, a lot of people in the area have never fished for them before. It's drawing a lot of interest, both in-state and the neighboring states.
By 1990, northern pike were plentiful in the lake. Many of them were huge. In April of that year, anglers broke the state record 4 times as they hauled in hefty pike weighing over 30 pounds. On April 11th, 1992, a lucky angler caught the current state record pike of 38 pounds, a 4-foot-long fish with a 23-inch girth. What's so unique about pike is that just about anyone, regardless of skill and experience, can catch them.
You can do it without a lot of sophisticated equipment. You don't really have to have downriggers and electronics and everything. You know, a good rod and reel and you're pretty much set.
During the April spawning season, anglers seem to be the most successful fishing with bait.
Most guys will fish this underneath a bobber, and we usually recommend a slip bobber setup. That sets your depth, and a slip bobber. And then I have a little weight on there to cast it out, and then just a snap swivel where we hook the leader to.
Chris Comer of Ketchum comes up to Coeur d'Alene Lake each spring to catch pike.
I fish for the whole thing. I love it too. I think it's a great fish, you know. I think it's the fight, to be truthful, you know. You can't catch anything that big nowadays, it seems like, you know, unless you're out in the ocean or something like that type of deal, you know.
And the all-Idaho experience of sitting back on a lakeshore, taking in the sights while waiting for a huge fish to snare your lure, is a fine way to spend an afternoon, too.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's like you're on your own lake place here. Can't afford one, but, you know.
Want to see you, Grumpy Bear? Want to see Grumpy Bear? We play all the time, so we learn how to be bears.
On rare occasions, we run into folks who devote much of their life to others. For the past 9 years, Bud and Mary Vanderbilt have devoted their entire lives to the welfare of orphaned wildlife. At their secluded mountain ranch near Hayden Lake, Bud and Mary have become experts in wildlife foster care.
Pretty quiet today. Not at all your usual nasty self. We'll get there. We'll get there.
Mary Vanderbilt is raising this young black bear cub named Mickey because the cub's mother was killed in a logging accident.
Come on.
When animals like Mickey get turned into the Fish and Game office, Mary and Bud often end up taking care of them. That's because they are Fish and Game's favorite wildlife foster parents in the Panhandle.
Definitely by far the best that we have in the northern part of the state and perhaps statewide.
Right now, Bud and Mary are taking care of two white-tailed deer, the bear cub and a snowshoe hare. Later this spring, the Vanderbilt Ranch will turn into a wild zoo of sorts, playing home to a dozen deer fawns, perhaps a moose or an elk, a bobcat, and maybe a raccoon, not to mention the domestic livestock that graze in nearby pastures.
But to us, it's almost everything. Come about the middle of June, it's pretty crazy around here. It can be, we've had as many as 17 fawns at one time, along with maybe 5 or 6 raccoons and a couple of bobcats and maybe an elk or a moose. So you have your hands full.
Near the barn, Bud and Mary have developed a number of special pens and habitat features for orphaned wildlife. One pen is enclosed around a tree for the bear cub to practice climbing. It also contains brush for natural forage. But sometimes the Vanderbilts have to bring the critters inside the house for intensive care.
As a matter of fact, I thought last night I had 5 species of animal in my house other than human. We have a sick calf. He's in the basement. Cat, dog, rabbit, and a bear. And that's sort of an ordinary day.
Just as sure as the snow melts every spring, people invariably take deer fawns out of the woods, thinking they're orphaned, when they're actually not orphaned at all. You know, it's the classic Bambi syndrome.
In many instances, the animals that people find along the roads, logging roads and so forth, are fine. And so we really discourage people from picking up animals and bringing them to anybody for care, including us, unless, of course, you have an obvious situation where you have a road-killed doe, for example, and a fawn's hanging around alongside the road.
You can't move fast.
The Vanderbilts have 2 white-tailed deer at their place right now that are awaiting release after being brought in as fawns 1 year ago.
The little doe right here, she came from Kellogg Wallace area, and she was ripped off, and she was pretty much near death. And the little buck, he came locally. Some kid, so he said, found her tangled up in the woven wire fence.
Got to learn how to fight hard.
To keep the wild animals as wild as possible, Mary Vanderbilt spends a tremendous amount of time doing research on proper diet, medical treatment, and handling. In her kitchen, she prepares a special milk formula for a baby cottontail.
This little person should be fed every 2 hours. I feed him during the day every 2 hours, but at night, usually just go to bed around midnight and then get up around 3 and then again about 6. So.
Bud and Mary also have to treat wild animals in a manner that will preserve their wild instincts.
We absolutely try to keep their human contact to a minimum, number one. Nobody pets anything here. So it takes a long time to see if this system is going to work. But we now know that it does work because the first sow that we put back out has been seen with twins.
What a remarkable achievement. It takes 7 years for a sow to give birth to cubs. The Department of Fish and Game normally devotes most of its attention to sustaining overall wildlife populations, so it's nice that people like the Vanderbilts are available to look after individual animals. Unbeknownst to Bud and Mary, their friend and neighbor, Dr. Karen Hayes, nominated Mary for an Eddie Bauer Heroes of the Earth Award. She received the $10,000 award in January. In her nomination letter, Hayes wrote, "I believe the selflessness and dedication of people like Mary Vanderbilt is what will save this earth. To me, she is truly a hero."
I'm just big time fortunate that my husband agrees with this and enjoys it as much as I do. And as I've said before, our big pleasure is when Fish and Game comes and these animals get that second chance.
Oh yeah, I really like it, or we won't be doing it, you know. Like I tell some people, I hunted them for first 40, and the next 40 I want to replace them.
As we close our show tonight, we leave you with visions of the beautiful North Idaho Lake Country.